The room was dim, the only light a dull, flickering glow from a street lamp outside the window. Alex blinked groggily, the world around him swimming into focus like a bad photograph slowly developing. His head pounded, a dull, persistent throb that made it hard to think. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, peeling paint, cracks spreading like cobwebs. He sat up, the sheets clinging to his skin, damp with sweat. Panic rose in his throat, thick and suffocating. He swallowed it down, forcing himself to breathe, to take stock. A bed. A nightstand. A half-empty glass of water, still and undisturbed, as if it had been sitting there for days. On the floor, a pair of boots, scuffed and worn, the laces tangled in a careless knot. Everything in the room seemed familiar, and yet utterly foreign, like it belonged to someone else entirely. And maybe it did. Who the hell was he? He stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him, and crossed to the mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. His reflection stared back at him, unkempt, shadowed and blank. He rubbed his eyes, as if that would clear the fog, make everything fall back into place. But when he looked again, there was nothing. No flicker of recognition, no sense of self, just an empty shell of a man. The panic surged again, and this time he let it. His pulse quickened, and he backed away from the mirror, his hand brushing against something on the nightstand. A stack of photographs, carelessly fanned out as though someone had been rifling through them. His fingers trembled as he picked them up. The faces in the photographs were strangers, smiling, laughing, captured in moments of carefree joy. But there was something off about them, something that made Alex's skin crawl. He flipped through them, faster now, until one photo stopped him cold. It was him. Standing next to a woman with dark hair, her face half turned to the camera. His arm was draped around her shoulders, his expression a mask of contentment. But Alex didn't remember this. He didn't remember her. His breath caught in his throat, and a sharp ringing noise filled the silence, jolting him from the spiral. His phone. It was on the edge of the bed, screen lit up, vibrating softly. He didn't recognize the number, but something in him knew he had to answer it. He pressed the green button and lifted it to his ear. "Hello?" "Wei." For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then, a low voice, tense and hurried. "Alex." His heart stuttered. "Who is this?" A pause. He could hear the faint sounds of breathing, someone on the other end struggling with words. "You need to be careful. You're not safe." His throat went dry. "What do you mean? Who?" The line went dead. Alex stood there, phone clutched to his ear, the silence in the room pressing down on him like a weight. His fingers felt numb as he lowered the phone. The photographs on the bed taunted him, faces staring up at him. And the room that had once felt empty now seemed full of questions, full of ghosts. There was a note next to the photographs, half hidden beneath the glass of water. Crumpled at the edges, the ink faded but legible. He reached for it, his hand shaking. "Find the truth. It's not what you think." The words sent a chill down his spine. He read them again and again, trying to make sense of them. What truth? What wasn't what he thought? His eyes scanned the room for anything else, a clue, a memory, something to explain why his mind felt like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. That's when he saw the keys. They sat on the windowsill, gleaming in the faint light. 3 keys, one larger than the others, all strung together on a simple black band. They looked important, though Alex had no idea why. But his hand closed around them instinctively, like muscle memory, like he had held them 100 times before. He didn't know who he was, where he was, or what had happened. But there was one thing he did know: whoever had called him, they were right. He wasn't safe. And he had to find out why. The rain was relentless, beating against the pavement in a steady, rhythmic thrum. Alex walked through it, his hood pulled low, hands shoved into his pockets. His breath fogged in the cold, damp air, but the chill that crept along his spine wasn't from the weather. He hadn't stayed in the apartment long after the phone call. The walls had begun to close in, the weight of the photographs and the cryptic note making it impossible to breathe. He needed space, needed air, but the city was as oppressive as the room he'd fled. The streets stretched out in front of him, unfamiliar and vast, as if mocking his memory. People hurried past him, heads down, umbrellas up. They didn't see him, didn't care. He was just another shadow passing through, invisible in the downpour. But every step he took was loaded with the sense that something was wrong. Something fundamental was missing. His name, Alex. He clung to it like a lifeline, the only thing he was sure of. But everything else was a blank slate, waiting for answers that refused to come. He stopped at a window, staring at his reflection through the glass. It was distorted by raindrops, the edges of his face blurred and hazy. His skin was pale, his hair wet and matted to his forehead. But it wasn't the reflection that bothered him. It was the emptiness behind his eyes, like he was looking at a stranger. Alex exhaled slowly, pressing his palm against the cold glass. Who was he? What had happened to him? The questions circled his mind, unanswered and unrelenting, like vultures waiting to pounce. He turned away, the sound of footsteps on wet concrete catching his attention. A woman was walking toward him, no umbrella, her coat soaked through. She was staring at him. No, not just staring. She was walking straight toward him, her face pale beneath her dark, dripping hair. His pulse quickened as her expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across her features. "Alex," she said when she was close enough that her voice wouldn't carry in the rain. He blinked, his heart slamming against his ribs. "How do you know my name?"
Her eyes darted around, as if searching for something or someone in the shadows. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk. Not here."
"Who are you?" "Not here." She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a side street, out of the rain and away from the prying eyes of the main road. He yanked his arm back, the sudden movement making her flinch, but she didn't let go. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, the panic rising again, sharp and bitter in his throat. "Clara," she said softly, as if the name alone should explain everything. "You don't remember me, do you?" Alex shook his head, his mind racing. Clara. It wasn't a name that meant anything to him, but something in her eyes, fear, maybe desperation, made him hesitate. "Why would I remember you?" he asked, his voice tight. "Because we knew each other. Before all of this," her hand loosened on his arm, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Before you disappeared." His chest tightened. "Disappeared." Clara nodded, the rain trickling down her face like tears. "You were gone for months, Alex. I thought something happened to you." "Something did happen to me." He swallowed hard. "I don't remember any of it. I don't even know who I am anymore." She looked up sharply, studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You don't remember any of it?" "Nothing. Just fragments." Flashes of, he broke off, unsure how to explain the disjointed images that flickered in his mind, too quick to grasp, too fleeting to hold onto. Clara's face softened, and for a brief moment, Alex thought she might cry, but then her jaw tightened, and she stepped back, shaking her head. "It's worse than I thought." "What is?" Alex asked, his voice rising with frustration. He was so tired of the half-answers, the cryptic looks, the way everyone seemed to know something about him that he didn't. "What's happening to me?" Clara hesitated, biting her lip as if she were weighing what to say next. "You're not safe. That much I know. And if you don't remember, then maybe that's a good thing." "A good thing," he laughed bitterly. "I can't even remember my own life. And you think that's a good thing? You don't understand." Clara glanced over her shoulder again, her body tense as though expecting someone to appear out of the shadows at any moment. "There are people you don't want to remember. You are mixed up in something dangerous. And if they know you're back." "Back from what?" "I can't," she whispered, taking another step back, her face stricken with fear. "I can't do this." Alex grabbed her arm this time, forcing her to look at him. "Do what?" "Tell me the truth." Clara shook her head violently, pulling free of his grip. "You need to stay away, Alex. You need to stay away from them, if they find you." "Who?" His voice cracked with desperation. "Who are you talking about?" She backed up, her eyes wide, her breath quickening. "Stay away from them, Alex, and stay away from me." Before he could stop her, she turned and fled into the rain, her figure quickly swallowed by the downpour. Alex stood frozen in place, the city roaring around him, the sounds of traffic and footsteps and water crashing down on pavement, all blurring together into a senseless cacophony. Stay away from them. Whoever they were, they knew him, and they were dangerous. His pulse thundered in his ears as he realized something chilling. They already knew he was back. The air inside the apartment was thick, oppressive. Alex felt it pressing down on him as soon as he stepped back inside, like the walls had shrunk in his absence, boxing him in. He kicked the door shut, the sound echoing in the silence, and dropped his keys onto the chipped table by the door. They clattered against the surface, sharp in the stillness. He'd been walking for hours, replaying Clara's words over and over in his head. Stay away from them. The warning clung to him, sticking to his skin like the dampness from the rain. But it wasn't just the warning that haunted him. It was the way she'd looked at him, like he was someone she was scared of, someone dangerous. Was that who he used to be? A man people feared? The thought twisted in his stomach as he crossed the room, his eyes scanning the familiar yet foreign surroundings. The apartment was small and personal, a place someone passed through, not a home. There was no warmth here, no sense of a life lived. Just the bare essentials: a bed, a chair, a table, and the stack of photographs on the nightstand. He picked them up again, flipping through the faces, his face, searching for something that might trigger a memory. But nothing came. They were just images of strangers, frozen in time. Except one, the photo of him and the dark-haired woman. Clara. There had to be more. Something he hadn't noticed before. He walked to the small desk in the corner, tugging open the drawers. Papers. Receipts. Nothing useful. He rifled through them, his frustration mounting until his fingers hit something solid, something heavy. A small, locked drawer at the bottom of the desk. Alex stared at it, his heart skipping a beat. He felt a strange pull toward it, a sense that whatever was inside could be the key to everything. He tried the handle again, but it wouldn't budge. He cursed under his breath, glancing around the room for something, anything, to pry it open. That's when he spotted the larger key from the set he'd found earlier. He pulled it from his pocket, hands shaking slightly as he fitted into the lock. A soft click echoed through the room, and the drawer slid open. Inside was a single envelope, thick and yellowed with age. His name was scrawled across the front in a shaky hand, Alex Donovan. The sight of his own name felt like a punch to the gut. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope, the paper brittle beneath his fingers. Inside, he found a collection of old newspaper clippings, the headlines jumping out at him in bold, black print. Local man found dead in suspicious circumstances. Police investigate brutal murder in abandoned warehouse. His heart pounded in his chest as he read through the articles. The details were sparse, but one name kept appearing over and over: Ethan Donovan. His brother. The word felt foreign on his tongue, as though it belonged to someone else. But as he stared at the name, something stirred inside him. A flicker of recognition, like a light being switched on in the back of his mind. Ethan. His brother. Dead. There was another clipping tucked at the back of the envelope, different from the rest. It wasn't an article, it was a missing persons report. His own. Alex Donovan, last seen the night of his brother's murder. As blood ran cold. The report was dated over a year ago. He'd been missing for months, presumed dead. And yet here he was, alive but with no memory of what had happened that night. A low hum filled his ears, and suddenly the walls of the room felt too close again. He staggered back, his mind spinning. Why had no one found him? Why hadn't Clara told him the truth about Ethan? About who he was? He needed answers. Answers that couldn't be found in this apartment. The warehouse. The place from the articles. He had to go there. Without another thought, Alex grabbed his coat and headed out into the night. The streets were slick with rain, the city bathed in a dull, gray light as he made his way toward the old industrial district. His pulse quickened as he neared the warehouse, the building looming ahead like a giant, forgotten relic. The windows were shattered, the bricks weathered and stained. It looked as though no one had been here for years. But the moment he stepped inside, something shifted. The air was different, colder, as if the walls themselves were holding on to the memory of what had happened here. His footsteps echoed through the empty space as he moved further into the building. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, old papers, and something darker. Bloodstains, long dried, spattered across the concrete like a grisly reminder of the violence that had taken place here. And then it hit him. A flash, sudden, blinding. He stumbled, grabbing onto a rusted railing for support as the memory surged through him. He was here, standing in the middle of the room. The smell of blood was thick in the air, and someone was screaming. A figure lay crumpled on the floor, their chest rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. Ethan. Alex felt the weight of something cold and heavy in his hand, a gun. His pulse raced as he looked down, his reflection staring back at him from the polished surface of the weapon. He tried to move, to stop what was happening, but his body wasn't his own. "You don't understand," his voice said, but it didn't sound like him. It was harsher, darker. It had to be done. The figure on the floor, the one he now knew was Ethan, let out a broken sob, his voice hoarse with pain. "Please," he begged, his words barely a whisper. "Please don't." Another voice, someone else, shouted from behind him. "Alex, stop." But it was too late. The memory snapped back like a rubber band, leaving Alex gasping for breath. He collapsed against the wall, his hands trembling violently. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. The truth, his truth, was suddenly terrifyingly close. He had been here, with Ethan, and a gun. But who was the other voice? Who had tried to stop him? The echoes of that night hung in the air around him, heavy and suffocating. He was at the center of something dark, something violent, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know the rest. The rain hadn't stopped. It pattered softly on the windows of the cafe where Alex sat, his coffee untouched, cooling in front of him. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the storm brewing inside his mind. He should have felt something, anger, fear, maybe even guilt, but instead, he felt numb, hollowed out by the weight of what he had remembered. He was there the night Ethan died. The memory had crashed over him like a tidal wave in that warehouse, pulling him under, but it was still incomplete. It slipped through his fingers like water, just out of reach. He couldn't shake the image of his hand gripping that gun, couldn't unhear the sound of Ethan's voice pleading for mercy. Had it been me? The thought gnawed at him, eating away at the fragile thread of denial he was clinging to. Alex stared out at the rain, trying to make sense of it all, when a figure appeared in the doorway of the cafe. Detective Harris. He was exactly as Alex remembered him from the brief meeting they'd had, tall, wiry, with a face creased by too many sleepless nights. But this time, there was no pretense of friendliness in his eyes. Harris crossed the room and sat down opposite Alex without waiting for an invitation. He didn't say anything at first, just eyed Alex over the rim of his cup, as though waiting for him to break the silence. When Alex didn't, the detective sighed and leaned forward. "So," Harris said, his voice low but firm, "you've been busy." Alex tensed. "What do you mean?" "I think you know exactly what I mean." Harris reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin file, sliding it across the table toward Alex. "You've been asking questions. Showing up in places you shouldn't. That doesn't look good. Not for someone who's supposed to be dead." Alex stared at the file, his pulse quickening. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. The missing person report, the articles about Ethan's murder, maybe even the details of his own disappearance. His name, his face, all reduced to cold, hard facts in black and white. Harris watched him closely. "You want to tell me what you're doing back here, Alex?" "I didn't know I was gone," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper, "until recently." Harris's eyes narrowed. You don't remember anything, do you? Alex shook his head slowly. Not everything. Just flashes. That night, Ethan, I was there, wasn't I? The detective didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. You were the prime suspect, Alex. When Ethan was found dead, all the evidence pointed to you. Your fingerprints were on the gun. You were seen leaving the scene. But by the time we put it all together, you were gone. Vanished. Alex's stomach lurched. You think I killed him? Doesn't matter what I think, Harris said. The facts spoke for themselves. But now, with you back, maybe there's more to the story. There is, Alex said, his voice trembling. He glanced around the cafe, suddenly feeling exposed. I don't know how, but I didn't kill him. I remember holding the gun, but someone else was there. Someone stopped me. Harris raised an eyebrow. Stopped you? Alex nodded, the memory flooding back in sharp, jagged pieces. There was another voice. Someone shouting at me to stop, but I don't know who. I don't remember their face. Harris frowned, considering this. He tapped his fingers against the table, his eyes distant, as though he were processing the information, weighing its value. After a moment, he leaned in again, lowering his voice. You need to be careful, Alex. If what you're saying is true, someone else knows the truth. And if they went to all this trouble to get rid of you once, they won't hesitate to do it again. Alex swallowed hard, the detective's words sinking in like a stone. Who would do this? I don't know, Harris admitted. But I can tell you one thing. Your brother wasn't exactly a saint. He got involved with some dangerous people. People who don't like loose ends. Alex's chest tightened. Dangerous how? Harris hesitated, then leaned closer. Ethan was mixed up in some kind of scheme. Financial fraud, extortion, maybe worse. We never got the full picture, but whatever it was, it went deep. He was in over his head. And if you were involved? I wasn't, Alex interrupted. At least, I don't think I was. The detective gave him a hard look. Maybe not. But it doesn't matter. If they think you know something, you're a threat. Alex's mind raced. Ethan, his brother, had been involved in something shady, something that had gotten him killed. And now, whoever was behind it thought Alex was a threat. He could feel the walls closing in again, the pieces of the puzzle twisting and shifting into something darker, more dangerous. I need to talk to Clara, Alex muttered. She knows more than she's telling me. Harris raised an eyebrow. Clara. She was close to Ethan. She's scared. She told me to stay away from them, whoever they are. Harris's expression darkened. Stay away from Clara, Alex. She's not who you think she is. Alex blinked. What do you mean? The detective's eyes hardened. She's in this up to her neck. Whatever Ethan was involved in, she was right there with him. And if you're not careful, she'll drag you down with her. Alex shook his head, the words not fitting into the picture he had of Clara, scared, vulnerable Clara. No, she's terrified. She wouldn't. Terrified of getting caught, Harris said sharply. I'm telling you, Alex, don't trust her. She's hiding something. The conversation was abruptly cut short as Harris's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. I have to go, he said, rising from his seat. But remember what I said. Stay away from her and stay out of sight. With that, Harris turned and strode out of the cafe, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts. He stared down at the file on the table, his hands trembling. Clara, sweet, scared Clara, was hiding something. Harris was wrong about her, he was sure of it. But still, the seed of doubt had been planted, burrowing deep into his mind. What if she was involved? What if Clara had known more than she let on from the very beginning? The cafe seemed to grow colder, the rain outside heavier. He couldn't shake the feeling that the noose was tightening, that every step he took toward the truth only led him deeper into the dark. And somewhere, in the depths of his memory, a door was still locked, waiting for him to open it. The wind howled through the cracks in the warehouse walls, carrying with it the scent of damp and decay. Alex stood at the entrance, the broken windows above him creaking with the force of the storm outside. The place felt alive, as though it breathed with the ghosts of what had happened here. He hadn't wanted to come back. Every fiber of his being had screamed against it, but something, some primal instinct, had drawn him here again. This was where it had all begun, and now it seemed where it would end. The warehouse loomed over him, its darkened interior a yawning mouth waiting to swallow him whole. But Alex had no choice. Clara had called him, her voice shaky, begging him to meet her here. She'd promised him answers, promised him the truth. He could still hear her words ringing in his head, echoing over the rain. "I'll explain everything. Please just come." Now, standing in the same spot where his brother had died, the weight of what he was about to face bore down on him. He didn't know who to trust anymore. Clara had always been the one constant in his fractured world, but Harris's words gnawed at him, a dark warning. Was she really as innocent as she seemed? Or was she, too, playing a part in this nightmare? Alex stepped inside, the smell of rust and mildew thick in the air. His footsteps echoed in the vast, empty space, each step bringing with it a fresh wave of memories, flashes of that night, of Ethan on the floor, of the gun in his hand. "You don't understand. It had to be done." The voice, the one from his memory, seemed to reverberate off the walls, mixing with the distant rumble of thunder. It was his own voice, yet not. It was colder, more desperate. But what had to be done? And why couldn't he remember it clearly? "Alex." Her voice cut through the silence, soft and pleading. He turned, and there she was, Clara. She stood at the far end of the warehouse, her frame silhouetted against the dim light filtering through the broken windows. She looked fragile, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she were trying to keep from falling apart. Alex's heart twisted at the sight of her. This was the woman who had been with him through it all, the one who had seemed as lost and afraid as he was. And yet, the doubt lingered, poisoning everything. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Why here? Why now?" She didn't move toward him. Her eyes were wide, almost wild, and for a moment Alex thought she might bolt. But then she spoke, her voice trembling. "I couldn't keep it from you anymore, Alex. You deserve to know the truth." His pulse quickened. What truth? About Ethan? About what happened that night? Clara shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "It's more than that. It's everything. You don't remember it all, do you?" Alex clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "No, I don't. I've been trying to piece it together, but everything is broken, Clara. I need you to tell me the truth." She hesitated, then took a step toward him. "Ethan. He wasn't the person you thought he was. He was involved in something dangerous. You got caught up in it, Alex. We both did." "I know," Alex said. "Harris told me. He said Ethan was into something criminal, fraud, extortion. But that doesn't explain why I don't remember, why I—" "It wasn't just fraud, Alex," Clara interrupted, her voice rising. "It was worse. Ethan owed people, powerful people, money. He was desperate. He didn't know how to get out of it, so he dragged you into it. He made you believe you could help him, that you could save him." Alex felt his breath catch. Save him? From what? From them. Clara's voice broke. From the people who were after him. They came for him that night, Alex. And you tried to protect him. The memory slammed into Alex with brutal force. He saw it again, Ethan on the floor, blood pooling around him. The gun in his hand. The shadowy figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. "You were going to take the fall for him, Alex," Clara whispered. "You were going to take the blame so they wouldn't come after you. But when you pulled the gun, they stopped you." The other voice. The one he'd heard in his memory. It hadn't been a warning. It had been a command. "Who?" Alex demanded, his voice shaking. "Who stopped me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "I did." The world seemed to tilt around him. "You. But why? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were ready to throw your life away for him. Clara sobbed, taking another step toward him. Ethan didn't deserve your loyalty. He didn't care about you, Alex. He was going to let you take the blame for his mess. I couldn't let you do it. I couldn't lose you. Alex staggered back, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with horrifying clarity. It had been Clara's voice. She had stopped him from pulling the trigger. She had saved him. But why had he forgotten? Why had his memory been wiped clean? You weren't supposed to remember, Clara said, as though reading his thoughts. You were in shock after that night. I thought if I could just keep you away from everything, if I could make you forget, we could move on. You did this to me, Alex whispered, his voice hollow. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. I did it to protect you. Protect me, Alex laughed bitterly. You took away everything. My memory, my life, everything. I was trying to save you, Clara cried. I love you, Alex. I couldn't let them take you too. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of her words pressing down on him. The truth, raw and brutal, was finally in front of him. Clara had been both his savior and his captor, manipulating his memory to protect him from a danger he hadn't even realized existed. And Ethan, his brother. The man he had been willing to sacrifice everything for had been willing to let him die. I trusted you, Alex whispered, his voice breaking. Clara stepped forward, her eyes desperate. You still can, Alex. We can still leave. We can start over. Just you and me. We don't have to look back. But Alex was already shaking his head. The cold, hard reality had settled in. There was no escaping the past. Not now. Not ever. I can't, Clara, he said softly. It's over. For a moment they stood there, the storm outside raging against the warehouse, the wind howling through the cracks. And then, without another word, Clara turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows. Alex watched her go, his heart heavy. He was free now, but the truth weighed him down like a chain he would never be able to escape. In the end, the past had not stayed forgotten. It had come back to claim him.